As I said, my name is John Cowan, and I want to welcome everybody who's joining us today, but I want to particularly welcome our guest speaker, Rose Dyson, who we will introduce more fully in a moment. But first, I want to acknowledge that in the Toronto region, settlers and natives alike are bound in a treaty that's called the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. In this treaty, the dish represents the lands that we now call much of southern Ontario. It was an acknowledgement initially amongst Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee people, and later the British Crown, that the lands and their bounties are in common for us all. There's just one dish for all. Each is to take what it needs and leave the rest for others, figuratively sharing with one spoon. Notably, there's no knife in the dish as an indicator of peaceful sharing. This imagery I find instructive for all of us on the ways to deal with each other and the lands. It also rings with World Federalist ideals of managing the whole earth for all the people, peacefully, taking only what we need from the finite bowl. I believe this ancient dish with one spoon treaty is living instruction for the design of a global governance system that is fit for the 21st century. So we gather here today to discuss what World Federalists should do in the face of big tech using more than one spoon, I would suggest. Rose Dyson will help us understand the problems of big tech and plausible solutions. So I want to give you the short version of Rose Dyson's bio. It's rather lengthy, so I shortened it a lot, Rose. She's a consultant, author, and activist in media education with a doctorate in adult education. She's been an active leader, chairing Canadians About Violence in Entertainment, co-founding the International Cultural Environment Movement at Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri, serving on the board of the Center for Global Media Studies at Edward Murrow School of Communications at Washington State University, serving on the executive of the Canadian Peace Research Association, and we're blessed to have her as vice president of this Toronto region branch of the World Federalist Movement. She's provided consultations to both industry and government and spoken at both national and international conferences on media issues, youth education, teachers' professional development, crime prevention and the rehabilitation of offenders, and on sustainable development and the overlap between cultural and environmental issues. She's currently a member of the Anti-Child Exploitation on the Internet team, based in London, Ontario. Her book, which is now in its second edition, is entitled Mind Abuse: Media Violence and Its Threats to Democracy. She's written 10 chapters in 10 other peer-reviewed books and numerous papers published in journals and periodicals. She's received numerous scholarships and awards, amongst them recognition for peace building from the Canadian Department of Peace Initiative, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian Peace Research Association. We're grateful to Rose for giving her time and insights to us today. You are all encouraged to put questions in the chat, and we'll feed them to Rose following her presentation during our Q&A time. A recording of this event and a printed summary of what is said will be made available a couple of weeks from now to all the registrants and posted on the Toronto branch webpage at the World Federalist website. So, Rose, over to you.
Well, thank you, John, for that very generous introduction. I also want to thank everyone for their interest in this topic and logging on to be with us today. The talk I'm going to give is based on one that I gave this spring to at the Canadian Peace Research Association annual conference. It um, was subsequently adapted to be more relevant for world federalist considerations. What I've tried to do with this particular talk is review the ways in which the cultural environment, the natural environment, meaning climate change, which is a big problem these days, and the economy overlap, and how some of the same solutions and arguments concerning freedom of expression or the infringement of it keep coming up. Uh, how they are somewhat dated given the challenges that we are facing, and how some of these same arguments that come up come under, to some extent, the old adage that we keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. Sometimes we regard it as the definition of insanity, but that's perhaps a little too harsh. Anyway, much has been said about building a better UN Security Council within the World Federalists. We have the conclusions from the Pact for the Future and deliberations from Augusto Lopez Claro. So when he spoke in March of this year at the University of Toronto Faculty Club about the need for new global governance and a new architecture. In his talk, he proposed 4 basic pillars: security, economic and social, human rights, and a new Earth Charter, but nothing on media and communications technology, given that we are now living in a digital age where instant communications anywhere on the planet increasingly is regarded as a human right. So what I was proposing at that time is a 5th pillar in a new global governance architecture called a digital systems council that would be on a par with some of these others because they overlap. And like climate change, I don't think we could regard communications technology, and these days the discourse revolves almost entirely around artificial intelligence and what to do with it. We can't regard them as add-ons or afterthoughts. They're very much an integral part of the economy. So, but in order to understand why this is so important, I think we need to step back and review some of the trends and policy proposals or the lack of them, and the resistance to changes within the cultural environment. And so, although my remarks will be focused primarily on what has happened in Canada and the United States over the last 100 years or so, there will clearly be reference to how these impact the global economy and on the whole. So so here we are. Before leaving the Oval Office, Joe Biden, this was in 2024, November, the last presidential election, he drew upon Dwight Eisenhower's 1961 warning of the economic drift toward a military-industrial complex. But I argue or have over the years that it's developed more into a military-industrial entertainment complex, morphing into an autocracy. Certainly with what's happening now in the American government. Biden cautioned Americans to be wary of an emerging tech industrial complex, and we have seen many of this leading up to what has evolved in the Trump era. A wide latitude for innovation within the military and communications industry has gone on for decades, and has led to its convergence. Since the earliest days of filmmaking, we've had endless Hollywood blockbusters celebrating heroic feats in military battles. And when military spending was cut back briefly in the 1990s, some laid off personnel took their skills to Hollywood. Guns and Roses have always prevailed in both arenas, but chess and uh, may have been invented as a war game centuries ago, but now we have immersive, addictive first-person video shooter video games such as World of Warcraft, used to in military training, while also marketed to the youngest, most vulnerable people on the planet as entertainment, despite lots of evidence of harmful effects. The internet itself is important to remember. With universal access and now considered essential, was invented by the United States military. So this underscores the close ties of civil society with the military. Indiscriminate support for both industries have enabled rogue elements to thrive to the point where democracy based on the rule of law itself is now being eroded. And while artificial intelligence and machine learning are making contributions in fields like health and medicine and political campaigns, they are a problem. One of the books that's helped me to understand better just exactly how artificial intelligence works is the latest one put out by Noah Harari, which is Nexus, a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI. It came out in 2024, and he's, of course, one of the many voices calling for effective policy in the public interest before it is too late. And I mean, there are all kinds of other people who've written on artificial intelligence with warnings, and it's often been pointed out that those that know the most about it are the most concerned about the need for it to be reined in before it's too late. Gregory Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, being one of them. So to take a step back, the reevaluation of industry structures and concentrations of economic power has occasionally been attempted, but with marginal results. In Canada, the Royal Commission on Violence in the Communications Industry report in 1977, with over 87 recommendations, was one of the most extensive studies ever conducted up until that time. Its mandate was to build on research already done in the United States. But despite its call for a massive overhaul of the entire communications industry, little came of it. As Roy McMurtry, who was Attorney General of the province of Ontario at the time, pointed out, he had helped set up this particular commission. And he explained when I interviewed him for my doctoral thesis on the subject in 1993, that for a while the work of the commission helped to change attitudes, but about media violence, but on the whole, governments all over the Western world were paralyzed with fear of being accused of censorship. And so very soon it was back to business as usual. In 1989, attempts to link attention to links between violence in the media and real life returned temporarily following the Montreal massacre in Canada, where 14 female engineering students were murdered. Keith Spicer, who was chair of the CRTC at the time, called for the broadcasting, cable, and film industries to develop stronger codes on violence. The Canadian Broadcast Standards Council was subsequently set up in 1993 to deal with complaints from the viewing public. But once Spicer stepped down 3 years later, attention to the problem faded. And this particular council, which is still operating to the best of my knowledge, is really reactive rather than proactive in any way in terms of trying to address the escalation of violence in entertainment media. So for the next couple of decades, any concerns brought before the CRTC went nowhere. One excuse was that nothing could really be done to rein in the internet. My own response at public hearings I participated in was that if the financial market could be regulated and protected protected on the internet, so could the safety of children. Other excuses were that the commission was giving the technology a chance to develop, or that hardy perennial, any restrictions pose too grave a threat to freedom of expression. Attempts to eliminate funding for audiovisual productions deemed to be contrary to the public interest was introduced, I think, during the Harper years around 2006. But once the entertainment lobby organized themselves and went to Ottawa to object to what they insisted was interference with their freedom of expression, the bill eventually died on the order paper when the next election was called. I was one of the lone voices in the wilderness that actually went to Ottawa in defense of the bill. Another a thing that did happen in those days was that the Supreme Court of Canada upheld in a 5-4 decision, upheld a decision that was to protect the Quebec Consumer Protection Act, banning advertising to children 13 years and under on the basis of research showing harmful effects. So far, Quebec is the only province to adopt such legislation in Canada, despite repeated calls from boards of health in Ontario and attempts to introduce similar bills at provincial and federal levels. It was reported in the Globe and Mail in 2019 that proposed legislation from Health Canada to amend the Food and Drug Act by restricting food and beverage marketing to children due to rising obesity and other health problems had hit a familiar snag. Industry protests that such regulation would be unrealistic, punitive, commercially catastrophic, and have several unintended and negative effects on the ability of corporations to do business. There are actually many countries around the world that have implemented this kind of legislation for one reason or another. I'll say a little more about that in a minute. According to the Harvard Medical School-based Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, in 2006, Disney sold 20 million Baby Einstein films, or videos rather, despite the fact that both the Canadian and the American Academies of Pediatrics recommended no screen time at all for children under the age of 2. Over $17 billion was spent that year advertising products to children, a staggering 170% increase over the 10-year period, approximate 10-year period. The number of countries, as I was saying, banning advertising to children has grown, but despite alarms raised by the World Health Organization and others for numerous reasons, including the cancer-causing potential from low-level radiation from digital devices, adequate protection of children remains elusive. So again, I just want to stress and the fact that these same arguments have come up whether we've been talking about harmful effects from television or film, or of course now we've got social media. It was only after Trump was elected in 2016 that serious introspection within the mainstream news media began to take hold, but with marginal results. And fast forward to the present, actually, on that score, CNN earlier this year had a program in which they reviewed media as it has developed since the era of the McCarthy years and Edward Murrow's broadcasting and reporting on it. Following this particular documentary that was aired, there was a panel discussion involving various heads of the different American networks. And while they were all quite concerned about what was happening to media and how it was advancing the agenda of people like the MAGA group and of course Trump, none of them made any reference to the overlap and blurring distinctions between the various forms of media like advertising and entertainment and news. I mean, there's been a lot written about how news is developed to be edutainment or infotainment more than straight factual reporting. But if we fast forward to the present, and in Canada alone, in over the past decade, at least 6 bills have been introduced to establish some boundaries around internet for use that would involve protection for Canadian-generated news media, for children from sexual abuse, adoption. There's been talk of an online harms bill, and restrictions on the huge pornography industry, which now accounts for about 40% of all internet use. The largest multinational porn industry in the world, founded and headquartered in Montreal, is owned by a Canadian private equity firm that calls itself, or did, Equity Capital Partners. I think they've again changed their name that particular rather ironic name is still part of this conglomerate. All of these died on these particular bills died on the order paper once Parliament was prorogued in January of this year. Similar forms of legislation are surfacing in other countries around the world, with Australia among the first to ban social media entirely for children under 16. And I think Britain's taken some steps to protect children in this context, and so has California. But the arguments remain that this is perhaps too grave a step on the subject of censorship. Now, prior to 9/11, a political scientist, Benjamin Barber at NYU, wrote a book called Jihad versus McWorld, in which he discussed consumer capitalism versus religious and tribal fundamentalism, and argued that it is Western hypocrisy rather than democracy that incites outrage. In his book Consumed, which came out in 2007, he said, in this new epoch in which the needy are without income and the well-heeled are without needs, radical inequality is simply assumed. In the United States and Canada, for example, with just over 5% of the world's population, control almost 1/3 of the world's private consumption expenditures. So this is seldom acknowledged in the discussions on how to address climate change and our consumer-driven economies. Barber argued that the triumph of capitalism has created a cultural ethos of induced childishness, closely tied to the demands of consumer capitalism. Well before April 2nd of 2025, when globalization facilitating a worldwide exchange of goods and services was upended by Trump's introduction of tariffs in over 100 countries, the United States, as the richest economy on the planet, was marketing popular culture, one of its leading exports, it's important to remember, into every corner of the globe, and along with it, the American lifestyle. Two key ingredients in these films, television programs, music, and video games exported are sex and violence, because they sell well on a global market and translate easily into any language. Now we have algorithms in social media steering eyeballs toward violent imagery as the most profitable, in lockstep with previous media trends. Purposely designed to be addictive, they reinforce outrage, hate, and violence. As Facebook whistleblower Frances Hagan said in 2019, when she went before Congress to discuss these trends, we have evidence from a variety of sources that hate speech, divisive public speech, and misinformation on Facebook and its family of apps is affecting societies around the world. So collectively, these genres are seducing us into what Chris Hedges argues in his book by the same title is an empire of illusion. We are now immersed in a cultural environment where many of us are giving up the linguistic and intellectual tools to cope with complexity and to separate reality from fantasy. And there are experts on AI now that are saying it's another thing that artificial intelligence or the latest um, aspects of it are doing is really beginning to confuse people with in terms of distinctions between reality and fantasy. And no one embodies these characteristics better than Donald Trump. Who rose to prominence, as we know, on the American TV program, The Apprentice. For him, the truth and factual information are irrelevant as he constructs his own versions of reality. It's also a shade of postmodernism, which is a trend that swept the world in recent decades or centuries, really. The early days, in the early days, CBS TV was delighted with the boost that Trump's outrageous comments gave their ratings. And now, of course, more recently, they've been involved in lawsuits he has initiated as the unimpeachable president, objecting to some of their programming. So capitalizing on authoritarian populism, metastasizing throughout the developed world, he has interwoven his own set of false promises to make America great again with those of neoliberal ideology that has been widening the gaps between the haves and the have-nots for centuries. So Trump's campaigning style has become normalized among his followers, as we've learned, were young males, whites, among others, embittered by the DEI trends, or what they call the cultural wars. And they reportedly felt more comfortable in Trump's campaigns, where refrains of white male privilege were replaced with resentment. His vulgar, coarse, and angry rhetoric, like so much content in the horror shows and music and video games, was familiar entertainment. Some young males, regardless of color, voted for him because his rallies were said to be more fun than those of Kamala Harris. This is hardly a surprise. Sophie Gilbert says that in our post-feminist world, women are portrayed once again to be sexy young waifs, not world leaders. And of course, more recently, events move so fast that many of these young people have moved back to the Democratic fold because it's becoming increasingly evident that Trump is not living up to his promises. But in the meantime, there's been a tremendous amount of disruption in the world economy and with all the problems that that entails, the anxieties and insecurities. So if it's been pointed out, if political rhetoric is an indicator of cultural change, then one generation's vulgar entertainment becomes the next generation's accepted style of political discourse. That seems to be what is happening in the US. Democracy, with its host of freedoms, rights, and entitlements based on the rule of law and the will of the people, is meant to be a mirror. Democracy may have been on the 2024 presidential ballot, but not enough people thought it was worth saving or seriously under threat to vote for it. I think it was Justin Trudeau that once said, when he was, or not Justin, his father, Pierre, that there are many reasons why people vote, but he took him about 8 years to realize that a just society was not one of them. I don't know what that says about our collective human nature, but it's an interesting observation, I thought. And in fact, early poll numbers assessing Trump's popularity 4 weeks into his presidency indicated they were down among every cohort except young men between the ages of 18 and 24 years. They seem to like the chaos. Now, of course, it's the last set of elections. As I said, the Democrats are feel that they have attracted many of these people back into their own fold. In his book, Trumpocracy, David Frum pointed to evidence that online radicalization of white men in particular, this book came out in 2018, it was radicalization of white men in particular had reached astronomical levels, and a key reason for Trump's successful election in 2016. By 2014, non-college educated young men out of work were spending an average of 8.6 hours a week playing video games, more than double the rate of a half decade earlier. Pornhub, launched in Montreal in 2007, reported 1 million daily visits by November of that year. By 2015, the number of visits were up to 50 million, with Americans in the lead. The subsequent rise in sexual bigotry, according to David Frum, was a key reason for the antipathy toward Hillary Clinton as a candidate in the 2016 presidential election. And of course, all that happened before COVID. The rise of movie star politics may have begun with the image-based contests of John Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and now Donald Trump. But the constant flow of action-filled entertainment on digital screens anywhere in the world for decades has coarsened the mainstream dialogue. If television reduced us to mere observers of events beyond our control, social media brought back action and engagement, and along with it, enragement, with algorithms captivating eyeballs on addictive handheld digital devices available to the owner 24 hours of the day. In 2024, the American presidential election was estimated to have included more political speech generated by bots than by human beings. That was according to an article that was published soon after the election in the New Yorker. Such violent entertainment results in what media scholar George Gerbner warned is a hidden curriculum for a mean world syndrome that would lead to the silent crumbling of our democratic institutions. He was saying that in the 80s and 90s. American military psychologist David Grossman calls this trend AVIDS, Acquired Violence Immune Deficiency Syndrome. These cultural toxins I would argue, as they have, are as dangerous to our well-being as carbon emissions that fuel the climate crisis. Such institutionalized violence focused on profit for shareholders rather than the good of the consumers has brought us to the brink of human extinction. I mean, there's an overlap between these things. Huge energy and water consumption required to build, expand, and maintain our consumer-driven lifestyles, which now include internet use with new innovations of artificial intelligence, are just not sustainable. We're hearing about that more and more in the news. The fact that the water and energy demanded by these artificial unit buildings that are under construction are, in some cases, according to, I think it was CNN last night, are standing idle because there's simply not enough energy available to them. So demands on these resources are and also, I would say that in the most recent Canadian budget that was brought out by the government, um, are threatening to roll back half a century's worth of environmental regulation, and this is a problem as well. So how did this happen? Well, profit-driven media entertainment encroachment into every aspect of our lives crept up on us gradually. It began with when early checks and balances put in place for protection of the public were dismantled. The seeds for the democratic crises we now face were planted in 1952, in my view, when a landmark legal decision opened the floodgates for what could pass as speech to be protected. It's not often understood that the First Amendment's been pretty flexible about what it was designed to protect or been regarded as protecting since it was first drafted by the Founding Fathers. In 1915, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that censorship could be applied to films because they were a business produced for profit-driven purposes and not part of the press or the organs of public opinion. The film classification system put in place around that time was enforced until 1952, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that particular decision from 1915 on censorship and ruled that films could indeed be included within the free speech guarantee of the First Amendment. This reversal resulted in the complete industry overhaul of the monitoring system for all genres of public culture. And since then, it's been a case of the fox guarding the household. It really opened the floodgates as to what would be allowed with a new classification system and so on. Effort to draw attention to the dangers of the increasing leniency posed persisted, but with little results. In 1989, a Washington, D.C. crowd was told by a New York City based commissioner on cultural affairs that incompatible worldviews were threatening the foundations of democracy. In his book, Michael Medved, a film critic in Los Angeles, the book title is Hollywood versus America, Popular Culture and the War on Traditional Values. And what he did is in that book was raise the alarm over the glorification of ugliness, urge to offend, infatuation with foul language, addiction to violence, hostility to heroes, and the bashing of American contemporary films. I remember meeting him and discussing these things with him on a television program, actually, back in I guess it was the early 90s. And the bashing of heroes and the hostility toward them is something, of course, we've experienced here in Canada as well, with Sir John A. Macdonald, Ryerson, Dundas being examples. These trends received another boost in 1987 when the U.S. Federal Communications Commission eliminated its fairness doctrine, which required broadcasters to present contrasting views of controversial public issues. The decision opened the way for the first generation of right-wing talk radio. The internet, free of any kind of content rules, simply followed the lead of what radio and television had started, catering to a vast audience and advertising base with increasingly angry, often apocalyptic political indoctrination packaged as news and performed as entertainment. Online computer gaming has fueled populism and given rise to the alt-right. Radicalized men gather on the internet to strategize and seek pathways into mainstream politics. They tend to be anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, sexist, and racist. And we saw some of the manifestations of this in the July 6th, 2022 the storming of Congress in the U.S. The PBS actually aired a documentary on Frontline in well, actually, this attack took place, yes, in 2022. The PBS aired a documentary on Frontline on how the alt-right were emboldened by Trump during his first presidency, dating back to the Charlottesville riots in August of 2018. But by March of 2022, according to another documentary called The Rise and Fall of Telegram, things have only gotten worse. Loosely moderated platforms spread hate and promote terrorist attacks with a shared goal to topple modern democracies and replace them with all white ethno states. And it's a sad irony, it's been pointed out by others as well, that the industry-friendly approach toward First Amendment protection for racist, dehumanizing content, which masquerades as a pillar of a democratic principle, is instead paving the way for its erosion. So the question is, how do we turn these things around? What role should education play that ensures a well-informed, civic-minded electorate exercises the right to vote? Well, we saw again in the most recent elections in the states and New York City with the new mayor and so on that young people have been galvanized to get out and vote. Social media is probably sparked their interest and involvement in a way that's much greater than may have been anticipated even a year or two ago. So, how much of a difference can such measures make the education on civics in an age of algorithmic politics? Well, I guess we're beginning to see that. It has been argued by media scholars that the influence of parents and teachers on the values and belief systems of the young has been outstripped by popular culture and digital devices for some time. And the warnings from behavior scientists such as moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt, author of the best-selling book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness, are multiplying. And it should be pointed out that while there might be evidence of young people getting more involved and engaged in politics, that hasn't moved the numbers at all in terms of the anxiety and mental illness that's causing so many problems. So what Jonathan Haidt says in his book is that tech companies based on the U.S. West Coast created a set of world-changing products that took advantage of the rapidly growing internet. When faced with evidence that their products were harming young people, they engaged in denial, obfuscation, and public relations campaigns. And that's been going on now for several decades. Prior to Trump's reelection, companies were beginning to acknowledge their own moral and legal responsibility for how they treat minors. The age appropriate design code enacted in the US in June of 2020 is one example, and the state of California, as I said earlier, is coming up with a version of the law. We've had the new one that has been implemented in Australia, and discussion of more to come in other countries. But and this is something that has been argued for a long time, including by Judge Lou, the late Judge Lou Bulio, who is one of the commissioners on the Lamarche report that I mentioned earlier. The onus for proving that the products produced by these media industries and distributed are not harmful to their consumers should rest with them rather than with the public. And with most consumer commodities, the safety of these innovations need to be determined before they were released into the marketplace, not after. So the media industries enjoy an exemption in that regard that I think needs to be re-examined. There are also contradictions in protecting every conceivable kind of speech because these place unreasonable limits on other rights and freedoms. COVID demonstrated how quickly fundamental freedoms and democratic institutions can be suspended in favor of health and safety. After 9/11, speaking about the proposed Anti-Terrorism Act, former Canadian Justice Minister Irwin Cotler argued that it was human security legislation that aimed to protect both security, speech, and human rights. Canadian courts have also developed arguments for free speech that are bound up with other interests and values. The right to free expression, for example, will inevitably be weakened by hate speech. And underpinning accusations of cancel culture lies a fundamental principle that free speech for some ends up silencing and excluding others. All human rights are interdependent and interrelated. A more practical and balanced interpretation of what should be protected is required. Free speech may provide democracy with the oxygen it needs to survive, but oxygen on its own is combustible and destructive. Tech companies now have complete control over the design of their platforms, creating a digital communications infrastructure used by political strategists and private corporations to organize and automate political discourse. Preserving democracy will require hard choices about communications technology. The decisions we make in the coming years will determine whether summoning artificial intelligence proves to be a terminal error or the beginning of a hopeful new era in our human evolution. So with that, I've concluded, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Rose. That's quite the litany of issues that we face. I'm going to turn to Norbert in a moment to review the chat, but I encourage everybody to put questions in the chat so that we can organize the questions that come forward. But as the convener here, I'm going to take the privilege to ask the first question. What you referred at the beginning to world federalism and all that, but what do you think world federalists, especially here in the Toronto branch or in Canada, should be doing against all these many problems that you've laid out?
Well, I meant to mention earlier, and this, I suppose this is a good time. I was really encouraged to read through the report from the a recent World Federalist Conference, there seemed to be much more acknowledgement of the impact and importance of dealing with artificial intelligence in particular than I think has been the case in the past. And as you and I've talked, John, about in the past about how the Constitution that governs world federalism in Canada anyway really doesn't acknowledge the impact of communications technology or artificial intelligence sufficiently, in my view. As I tried to explain at the outset, we can't tack on things like communications technology or artificial intelligence and climate change at the end of as an afterthought from the larger economy, global economy. They are very much an integral part of it. And so updating our perspective, I guess, on how to govern effectively or advocate effective governance on a global basis through world federalism needs to more fully acknowledge the impact of communications technology. And I would argue popular culture in particular. There's one expert, I believe he's at Stanford, his name's Scott Russell. He recently was interviewed by Meta Spencer for one of her town halls, and on what to do with artificial intelligence or how you bring the public along to appreciating how important it is. And he said, well, we're going to have to turn to popular culture. In other words, acknowledging what a great impact it has on the morals and values of people. And that's another component that we might want to talk about. I probably don't stress it enough in my remarks earlier.
Okay, thank you. I'm turning it over now to Norbert DaCosta, immediate past president of the Toronto branch, to convene the rest of the questions. Norbert?
Thanks, Rose. That was very comprehensive and very enlightening. Again, everyone, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat or use the raise hand feature to ask your question in person. To do that, you can click on the React heart-like icon at the bottom of your screen and click on raise hand. Before I ask the first question from Claire Adamson, similar to along the lines that John had connecting BIGTech with world federalism, are there any aspects of BIGTech that can actually facilitate us getting to a federated world? For example, could cryptocurrency, for example, erode national currencies so that we have a common economy? So any positive aspects to BIGTech in terms of world federalism?
Well, good heavens, I'm not an economist or an expert on financial matters, but it seems to me we're moving in that direction, whether we like it or not. We've got cryptocurrency and blockchain and all kinds of new forms of currency that are evolving and circulating in the globe. So we probably are moving in that direction. More importantly, or as important, in my view, is that some kind of ethical rules are established as to how this is to be done. I know that Thomas Friedman is one journalist who's been following the development of artificial intelligence and where it's taking us or not or in recent months, and he was interviewed and been writing in the New York Times about how the only solution to us successfully being able to contain these new technologies is for a set of principles and do's and don'ts are established as to how all economies are to function, and that will require collaboration or cooperation between the U.S. And China, who are the leaders in this field right now. That does sound like a bit of a pipe dream, but on the other hand, there are those that suggest that China may be more amenable to this right now than the U.S. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's I guess we have to keep pressing for a collective stand, a set of rules that need to be enforced.
Thanks, Rose. Let's go with the question from Claire Adamson from Montreal. How does free speech for some prevent free speech for others?
Well, as some of the Canadian court decisions have pointed out, and I don't have any specific case that I can think of now, except, well, actually, the legislation that was upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada on advertising being banned for children 13 years and under. That's the way it exists now, only in the province of Quebec. The position of the Canadian judiciary, as I understand it, has been that freedom of expression needs to be curbed if it's going to interfere with the safety and well-being of others. I mean, there have been previous court decisions on the pornography and its harmful effects in that context, and advertising toward children, and it's more recently hate speech, and as pointed out, and others have, cancel culture. You can't, because the hate speech directed at somebody automatically limits their ability to rights of protection. So that's the standard that Canada has generally been governed by, as I understand it.
Thanks, Rose. We've got a question from John Cohen. Can we end anonymity on the web? It seems to enable all sorts of foul things that could not be published in old media. Naming the author would make it self-limiting.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please? Your suggestion, sure. John? Okay, go ahead.
John, do you want to speak up?
Okay, my concern is that by being able to publish things on the internet without your name being known or using a fake name, people can hide and say all sorts of things that they wouldn't be able to say if they knew their true persona was going to be identified. Is there something we can do about that?
Well, actually, Taiwan is doing some very interesting things on that. I'm participating in some discussions on artificial intelligence that have been organized by Meta Spencer, who many of you know. It's come up that the way Taiwan is handling this is that they're anything that is posted has well, it's more as it relates to artificial intelligence. Anything that's posted needs to have a name of whoever it is doing the posting, and certainly that could apply to anything on the internet, so that it eliminates this business of people hiding behind anonymity. So there is technology developing, and people are finding this quite successful. The Taiwanese seem quite happy with it, according to one video that involved an interviewee on the subject.
How recent is that, and is it something that we could emulate here in Canada?
Yes, well, we're certainly discussing that in Meta's group. It should be looked into. I can certainly provide you with the links through Meta on it, because there's one of our participants from one of the American universities is regards it as entirely doable or very much doable for any country to that wants to seriously consider curbing this and isn't paralyzed with fear that it's going to interfere with freedom of expression.
Thanks, Rose. Any other questions? I've got a question for you, Rose.
Okay.
Are there any, similar to the question regarding cryptocurrency, are there any other aspects that can positively contribute to world federalism? For example, can artificial intelligence be used to determine a path forward to world federalism?
A path forward to do what precisely?
To world federalism.
Well, let's face it, artificial intelligence, the internet itself, there have been many other things that belie containment within sovereign borders or national borders. This is one of the fundamental beliefs of world federalism. And so, sure, it can help, but with plenty of appropriate checks and balances, and how we come up with those is going to be very important, because I don't see collaboration and cooperation evolving with in a rules-based system. Presumably the rule of law is what we would like, world federalists would like to see acknowledged in the way successful governance develops. So we're going to have to perhaps take a step back and reintroduce the importance of ethical considerations.
Thanks, Rose. Are there any other questions for Rose, or would anybody like to comment on anything? Have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to make some
Go ahead.
comments.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I just want to go back to something that's been raised by, and that is,
Can't hear you.
sorry, it goes back to the Enlightenment, in which there was a necessity for all people to be educated in certain matters, and which was a definition of free speech that would clearly eliminate the misinformation and the disinformation that prevails our current public media. Tolerance, for example, was a critical principle of the Enlightenment, which would not tolerate, clear that wouldn't tolerate hate and all of that sort of language that prevails our current media. What's left out, of course, of all of this is the other part of the problem of democracy, which is the failure of the economic system. The economic system, as I've explained in the last presentation, is totally different from the current capitalist-driven oligarchy system. That's what we have had for the last 60 years. So we have lost the culture somewhere between 1915, I think, that Rose spoke about. Somewhere between 1915, we lost that sense of public speech. That, of course, would be brought back if we go back to the Enlightenment principles of social justice, economics, and free speech, which is only free to the extent that it is Um, uh, it eliminates disinformation and misinformation, and it eliminates um, um, intimidation that comes from violence and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of stuff that Rose has covered on the economy, which all of which I agree with. What is completely missing, though, is a total new perspective on what are the requirements in a society and in its economic system if we aspire to have a truly democratic polity.
Well, those are, yeah, very interesting points, Peter, and thank you for that. And I think what you point to, and others have as well, is that in 1915, we still had some standards as to what would be allowed and what wasn't. And those were removed with the overturning of the 1915 decision by the Supreme Court in 1952. And when you make reference to in the Enlightenment, another aspect of it, it was that religion was taken less seriously. It was pushed into the background, and reason and science were supposed to be the prevailing norms that would enable us to make progress as a people, I suppose. But the downside of that was that the difference between what is right and what is wrong gradually eroded as well. I can recall, and David Brooks with the National or with the New York Times has written quite extensively on this and related it to why Trump has risen to the prominence he has and so on. I remember when I was working on my doctorate at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, there was lots of discussion on morals and values, moral relativism as a values clarification, whether prayer should be removed from the schools and so on. There were two books that came out around that time. One by a colleague by the name of Kathleen Gow. The title of her book was Yes, Virginia, There Is a Right and a Wrong. And a similar book like that came out in the States, and it was in the author's name I don't have here in front of me, but I remember the title. It was Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong. And it's that is considered a problem as we become more and more of a secular society. The confusion over what is acceptable or should be acceptable and what isn't has kind of gone out the window. So that somehow that has to be reinstated, or that we need more, not only emphasis on civics in schools, but also morals and values deliberations.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Rose. Any other questions for? Oh, sorry. Here we go. Claire has got a question. Do parents have enough control over sites their children can access?
Well, do they? No, probably not. The conventional wisdom for that the industry, of course, loves and has done a great deal to promote is that supervision of how children use social media ought to be conducted by their parents or teachers. And it's first of all, many children know more about how their devices work than parents do. And parents are often extremely busy and distracted, and simply it's too big a problem to be left only in the hands of parents. I work with a colleague who is a former high school principal and also an expert on communications technology, Charlene Doak-Gabor, who started up an organization called Internet Sense First. And of course, she has written 2 or 3 books on guides for parents on how to deal with this new technologies and supervise their children at the same time. It's challenging. It's difficult. Some parents would just not be able to handle it. But in the final analysis, this problem is one that has to be addressed by everyone in society, and that includes industry and government as well. And thus far, they have been lagging.
You make an interesting point there, Rose, because there are two aspects to it. There's the technology part of it, where companies can put in controls for parents to use. But the challenge is in our society where parents don't have the time, right? It's not a big tech issue. It's a question of the way we live, our society, and the absence of time that parents have in every way to focus on their children.
Well, not only that, but it's as I said in my presentation, when it comes to the production and distribution of things like food or appliances of one kind or another, they have to be tested and proven to be safe before they're released into the marketplace. That has not been the case with video games or any things that the industries choose to market. And legal scholars have argued that that's not fair. More needs to be expected of industry. And actually, they were coming around to some extent until Trump got himself reelected. I think Sam Altman, too, he's one of the Silicon Valley big tech gurus who was asking for more legislation from Congress. But they were coming. But once Trump got elected, these were all relaxed, and Facebook decided not to bother doing any more regulation because, after all, it wasn't required, or according to those around Trump. So that's a problem.
The two big problems with Facebook is that they are a monopoly, and they should be broken up. That's policy number one. Secondly, they should be taxed for the harms that they create, which involve a massive increase in taxation. Those are the solutions to the problem. The government will not introduce those because the government is in the back pocket of the corporate sector, and particularly the corporations that are involved in the media. They're all monopoly.
Well, that's true. Antitrust legislation.
They lobby day and night for reduced taxation and against any regulation whatsoever.
That is true.
Concept of free speech is you can say anything you want. Is totally anti-ethical in terms of.
But actually. Government has tried, as I say, I said, and the Harper government tried to bring in some restrictions, at least so that funding, telefilm and all these different subsidies and tax breaks that are given out to media industries, that these would be held back for all to be contrary to the public interest. But
these are so immaterial compared to the breakdown of the Standard Oil Company that the U.S. government introduced in 1910. That is the scope that needs to be applied. All of this other stuff is minor in its effect. So they need to be.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean.
The monopolies need to be broken. Facebook needs to be broken into at least 10 or 15 organizations that will compete with each other. That will, number one. Number two, the harms that they're creating.
That would
harms they're creating are
breaking them up going to solve the problem.
And so they should be taxed for the government to compensate the public for those harms. Standard economic theory.
Those would be And those recommendations have been suggested in the past, that a higher tax on harmful products, violent video games, for example, first-person
Right.
shooter video games.
Regulation is far more effective and important, but taxation is a substitute. If we tax them, we destroy the economic model, which is the whole point, is to destroy the harms that are being created by the social media.
How would you go about taxing the porn industry, for example, that's been started up in Canada?
Well, are there corporations involved in porn?
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
Uh,
then
uh,
that's what you do. You regulate them out of existence.
There's MindGeek, Pornhub, Ethical Capital Partners, as I said earlier. These are Atleo is another name that
It's completely anti a culture of free speech and democracy. Completely. If you're running a democracy, of course, you're not running a democracy. What you're running is an oligarchy that is run by corporate US, corporate Canada, for profit. That's what you have. And they have bought out the politicians. They finance their campaigns, they lobby daily, and they basically fund the politicians.
Okay, John, you have got your hands up.
Yes, I was intrigued, Rose, I was intrigued with your suggestion of sort of product safety standards. We have that for a number of things, like my washing machine has to have a CSA rating before it can be sold and that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily say that it does proper washing. It just says that it's electrically safe. Likewise, I imagine war games would somehow be vetted to some standard. Is there any place in the world that is doing that with digital products? And how could little old Canada do that in the face of a big bad elephant south of us?
Well, it's difficult because Hollywood has been such a big purveyor of this, and of course, a lot of those productions have been done in Canada. I mean, we could certainly put more restrictions on what's allowed to be produced here, because let's face it, Canada has often been referred to as the Hollywood of the North. But a number of countries have put restrictions on war toys, mostly that they're not to be advertised, because that would be one step in the right direction. In the same way that tobacco can't be advertised. The promotion of this kind of material tends to normalize it, and there's reason why advertising is effective. We're led to believe that it'll be good for us in some ways. In fact, there's someone by the name of Doug Anderson that keeps sending me emails. He's a former newspaper man and really feels that one of the problems with rogue media elements is that a lot of the legislation that's already been developed in Canada, the Canadian Advertising Council and so on, are not effectively enforced. In other words, there's a lot of false information and misinformation that is given out within the advertising industry, and that might also be more restricted. But certainly, to get back to your point, it's been argued by legal experts that there's been plenty of research on the impact of media on children, so that there's no reason why these video games, first-person shooter video games, can't be reined in or on the basis that they should not be released as a product because of their harm. And again, it was that unfortunate decision, the Supreme Court decision in 1953, that opened the floodgates for this kind of material.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and there are no more further questions. So would like to wrap up, John?
Yes, I will. Thank you for your participation here, Norbert, in organizing things. Rose, you've demonstrated to us the vast knowledge you have of all the things going on, and I have now a scary list of things to worry about, or well, I guess they're history. How we undo history is clearly a tangle, but I appreciate all the thinking and the presentation that you've done. It's been most enlightening for us.
My pleasure. Thank you, John, for your attention, everyone.